I'm just going to jump straight to the chase here and let you all know right now that this one is easily my personal pick of the week. And I'll get into the reasons why in a second, but first I'll just let you know how the core game plays. And this is a game where players are working cooperatively against the game. There's two different factions that players are going to be fighting against, and those factions can also occasionally fight against each other as well. But players are controlling their own faction, each with their own asymmetric abilities. And each faction actually has two different leaders that play a little bit differently, and you're only going to choose one of those to play in a given game. So you can actually play the same faction again and use a different leader, and it'll be completely different. But every player is going to have their own unique faction deck, and you're going to be using those faction cards to upgrade your abilities and your faction as the game goes forward. The cool thing here is that you won't actually be able to unlock all these cards in a single game, so you're going to have a few choices as the game moves forward. We're going to be deciding which cards that you want to unlock and which cards that you want to chain together with the ones that you've already unlocked, and which ones will give you the best opportunity depending on the way that the game has played so far. But that's not the only way that your faction is unique, because you're also going to have a unique player board with different types of units, and the different types of units have different costs in order to deploy those units, but then they can also roll different subsets of dice, and the different dice in this game have a few different icons on them and different probabilities that you will roll those icons, and they are distinguished by their individual colors. So depending on the types of enemies you're going up against, how much risk you want to take, and how much resources you're willing to spend, that's going to all play into which types of units you deploy and which types of dice that you're going to be able to roll when you engage in combat. And I really love the way that the enemies work in this game. They all have their own special abilities and different activations that can trigger at different points in the game or when they're revealed. But then they all share this really interesting mechanism called their threat. And different events will cause that threat to increase the longer that they're out on the board. And the higher that their threat is, the more dice they're going to be able to roll and the harder they're going to be able to fight against. The cool thing here is that the threat is also related to their health, so every time that you inflict damage on them, it's going to lower their threat level, lowering the amount of dice that they're able to roll. But to actually engage with these different enemies, they're going to have to be deployed out on the board along with your characters, and you're going to have to end up on the same hex, and that's going to trigger a battle. And players will be moving around the board, exploring these different hexes, building different buildings there in order to generate resources, and deal with different events and opportunities that can occur anytime that you explore a new tile. Players can also attempt to complete different quest cards, which usually give you some different bonuses like resources, victory points, or special actions. And each quest normally has multiple requirements that players can attempt to meet. And if you complete a subset of those, you will complete the quest. But depending on the subset that you complete, or if you complete all of them, it will change what you get as a reward. And those rewards can even stack depending on how many of those requirements you completed. But it's not all fun and games, because failing a quest also has its repercussions. Everything I just said to you is a ton of fun, and it's part of the reason that this one is my pick of the week, but this game actually has quite a lot going on in it, and normally I'm not usually a fan of games that have too much going on in it, but I wouldn't really say that this one has too much, because the polish that this game has, and the iconography, and the rulebook, and the index, everything that has been put into this game was done in such a great way that makes it very streamlined and really easy to play. And even though there's a lot that can go on in this game, it doesn't really feel like it, because everything just flows and is really intuitive, and that polish really brings it all together. And the game plays over a series of rounds, and you can play less rounds if you want a shorter game. But at the start of each round, players are going to be flipping these event cards, and that's going to have an effect that normally affects everyone. And it'll also have a bit of a story on it that will build a little story arc throughout the game. And some of them even have different options for players to make a decision. But it's super easy to follow through the sequence of this game, because there's a chapter track on the side of the board, and you're going to be moving a little token there to tell you where you are in the round. And that's going to walk you through every phase of the round, giving you almost all the information you need in order to play the game. This is a game that definitely had quite a lot of play testing, quite a lot of blind play testing, and quite a lot of iterations on its rulebook, because this is probably the most polished game that I've ever played. But like all games, this isn't necessarily for everyone. This is a long game to play. It does have the option of playing fewer rounds if you want to shorten it, but it's going to be a long game if you want to play the entire thing, especially in your first few times playing it. And another complaint that I have heard about this game is that the dice rolling can be a little bit swingy, where sometimes you have some great rolls and sometimes you have some not so great rolls. And if you have a lot of not so great rolls in a single game, well, that isn't always fun for everyone. I personally don't have that complaint, because I think the game gives you enough control in deciding which units to put out on the board, and in turn which dice you're going to be rolling, and then you always have the decision of when and which battles you go into. So I really just see it as a mechanism of how much you want to push your luck. And there's also all sorts of items and abilities that you can gain to prep for a battle and give yourself some better odds. For whatever my preferences are, it strikes that sweet spot of having enough randomness to keep the dice rolling exciting, but then it gives me enough strategy and options in order to mitigate those odds and try to put myself in the best position. It doesn't always work out, but to me that's part of the fun. But I think if you consistently play that way, you will eventually win this game. Just don't ask me if I've won it yet. But every time I have played it, I did feel like I could have won. And I have never once played this on the normal mode. I always played it on a slightly harder difficulty, which next time I will be definitely playing it on the normal mode. And I definitely recommend that for your first play. I have a habit of always jumping into the games on the hardest mode possible because normally the hard is never really that hard. This one's hard. But if you are particularly sensitive to dice rolling, or if you're not a fan of that push your luck mechanism, this expansion might actually provide a few options to tip the scales in your favor, because this campaign is going to be adding a few different modules that you can mix into the game, and a few of them will make the game a little bit easier and also allow you to have more consistency in your rolls. And the main module that will allow you to do that is the Ether module, and this is going to allow for a new resource that all players will generate, but then it's a shared pool of resources that can be split between players however they see fit, and you can spend those Ether tokens in order to re-roll your dice if you had a particularly bad roll. Of course, these aren't unlimited, so it doesn't completely break the game and make it super easy. You're still going to have a challenge, plus there are some modules in this that make the game harder. So if you want to balance it back out while still adding this module, that's also an option. And the next module is the Mercenaries Module, and this actually adds 13 different elite units that are not tied to a particular faction, and any faction can hire these into their army. Each of them also has their own unique special ability and their own dice type, and some of them even make use of 3 new dice types, which are bronze, silver, and gold, and these are more powerful dice which will have more consistent rolls than some of the other options, which is another way that will make the game a little bit easier. But enough about making the game easier, because I want pain, and there is a module for that, and that is the 26 new Nemesis Tokens, and these are going to be special abilities that are actually granted to the enemies, and anytime there is a group of enemies out on the board, you're going to be adding one of these tokens to that group of enemies, and it's going to be giving them a special ability and making them more challenging when you engage in battle. And there's also 2 brand new unique factions added to the game. First, there's the pirates that instead of building havens, they actually have pirate ships. And they also gain extra mercenaries as starting units, which can add a little bit of variability to the units that they have from game to game. And then there is the Titans of the First Age faction, and this one's really interesting because it actually plays a little bit like the enemy factions, but this one is not an enemy. This is a player-controlled faction, which means it's a good faction, but it is going to have a sort of threat meter, and as that threat meter increases, it's going to change the abilities and strength that you have in battle. I'm super excited about all these changes, but it doesn't stop there, because there's going to be brand new items, events, quests, and location tiles, and there's also going to be upgraded components for all the components that were previously in cardboard. Und das Spiel wird auch auf Deutsch angeboten. And the game will also be offered in German. And if you are even mildly interested in this one, you'll definitely want to follow along for the free gift, because it gets you a dice tray. And this is the type of a game that you really do want a dice tray. I actually bought dice trays specifically for this game. That's how much I like it. I have the extra dice pack as well. I don't really have a problem with rolling the dice, but just passing dice around the table is just so much easier with a dice tray. And of course, if you want to learn more or check this campaign out, I have links in the description below.